Welcome to part 3 of the Bobcat. I'm going to add some dark hairs with the sharp bottom edge of my 353 cordovan. We need to add all of our darks in before we add our light fur. So I'm just going to use that edge. I don't use the point. I use the sharp edge to add in those hairs in different places that I want. I think we need to have a few more hairs in place, so I'm going to do that with my dark. So this is 353 that I'm going to start with. So you can see I'm adding them to the outside edge of the bobcat's face. I'm trying to be kind of random with the placement. I don't want them to be too harsh or too sharp. Just carefully putting them in where I see them in my reference photo. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit while I add the 353 dark brown hairs. Now I have my 229 black new pastel, and I'm using it to add some black hairs to the bobcat. Just reinforcing the blacks that we originally put in. Not all of them, but just a few here and there. And I'm using the point at this part. I'm not using the back end. I'm switching back and forth between the black and the 353. And I'm using the point this time of the 353. I don't want to get the extra sharp hairs I get with the blunt end by using the edge. I'm just putting in some color with the 353. And now I'm using my dark gray 704.3 to add just a little more color on the face of the bobcat in some areas. Now I'm using the 229 black new pastel to darken the mouth a bit. I'm also using the black to get in between the dark, between the light fur areas. There's a dark space underneath the chin, so I'm darkening that up a bit as well. I've zoomed out the camera a little. I'm adding a little more black underneath the edge of the white fur where it gets darker onto the cat's body. I want to make sure we get that nice and dark before we add our light hairs. And now I'm using the edge of the black NuPastel, not the point, making sharper hairs with that edge. Now I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I add these black hairs using the edge. Now I'm using my dark gray to darken the cat's body. That's the 704.3 Rembrandt. And this is the 229 NuPastel. Now we're back in real time, and I'm using the bottom of the 229 NuPastel perpendicular to my board to put in some dark shapes. I want them to be kind of indistinct, not really into focus, to be kind of out of focus. So I'm using the bottom end of it to do that. I can see them in our reference photo in the coat, so I want to put them in the cat. But we don't want to make a lot of detail in that area. Now I'm also using the bottom of the 353 cordovan to add some dark brown shapes as well. I really like the way the body of the cat looks. Now I'm using my 353 to add a few more dark brown hairs as I see a need for them. Adding a little more black with the 229 black NuPastel. Putting in a few touches here and there of black fur. This is all in preparation for adding the final white highlights. Just emphasizing some of these black fur areas, make them just a little bit darker. It's easier to gradually go dark than put on too much pastel in the beginning and try to get it off later. Go slowly. I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I add these final dark touches to the face of the cat and some black to his ears, just going a little bit darker everywhere, taking my time. This is important. Take your time. If you get tired, take a break and come back to it. This is not a sprint or a race. So do take your time. Here I'm just out of camera shot. I'm using the black to add the edges to the ears. There's a little black edge on the outside of the ears, and I'm going to use the black to darken the tufts since we put our background in. So my hand's just out of the range of the camera, but that's what I'm doing, is darkening those tufts and looking for any final dark areas that I need to add before starting the lights. Now it's time to start adding those gorgeous light hairs. So I have my 211 white. It has 4 very sharp edges. Please stop as often as needed and sharpen your pastel. It'd be great if you have 2 or 3 of these and you can just switch them out instead of stopping to sharpen it. As you can see, I rotate my stick as I go, and I'm adding short little hairs to the edge of the ear. I'm going to add some color with that by using the edge of the 233 raw sienna. I'm going to bring in that color in the ear. Now I'm using my 353 cordovan to add some dark brown hairs right on the edge of that. It makes the little white hairs show up better. And now I'm going to add a few more white hairs in. Now I'm using my black. I looked at it. It needs to be sharpened, so that's what I'm doing. I'm sharpening my black. And now I'm going to add some black hairs into that area. There's some little black hairs on the outside edge of that ear, so I added those. Now I'm looking at my pastel, and I'm going back to adding hairs. This is the secret to how I make my animals look soft and fuzzy. It's using the edge of the new pastel stick to draw in the hairs. Pastel pencil will not work on this paper or produce the soft look that you're looking for. So it's well worth the time to practice this and to learn to do it. It takes a few paintings before you get the hang of it. So I'm adding those ear hairs. I can do that with the edge, I'm using the edge now, or I can use the corner to draw the ear hairs around when they begin to curve. So I'm going to add these outside hairs before I finish the hair on the inside of the cat's ear. Now if I want the hairs to be a little brighter, I push a little harder. If I want them to look fuzzier, then I let the stick get a little dull so that the hairs aren't quite as sharp. So I'm just drawing them from the outside edge into the inside of the cat. I'm adding some little short hairs right at the base of the ear Let's see how beautiful they are. Just adding them one by one. Then using the black to draw some black hairs out. We can draw hair out into the background now because we've added the background, and I'm adding some black hairs inside the ear. I'm continuing to add the delicate little hairs to the ear. Now I'm curving them around. I just love doing this part of the painting. It's really brings it to life. It's so beautiful. I'm continuing to add these hairs. I'm careful of direction and length, and I stop often to sharpen or switch out pastels for another one. So that one was getting dull, so I've gone and put it down for a while, and I've got my pastel pencil. So I'm going to use my pencil to draw out a few fine hairs and curve them around. And I'm going to put in a few black hairs with the tip of the 229 pastel. See, I can just add dark back into that white hair. I just love the way that looks. Adding a few more short little hairs at the base of the ear. I just love it. It looks beautiful. So now I'm going to go to the top of the head. The ear looks wonderful, and that's very encouraging when you get the ear in. Then we can start moving on to other light hairs on the cat. So I'm using my 211 white. I'm using a very, very light pressure, and I'm also using a random movement to place hairs so that I don't get too many, and we don't want them all lined up in a row. Now I've switched to my 299 light gray. That looks nice. So I'll probably go back and forth between the 299 and the 211 white. So here I've switched back to the 211 white. I'm adding a few white hairs in on the forehead of the cat. Be very careful of the direction. of the fur. I'm drawing in these delicate hairs around the eyes. They're a little longer in that particular area of the face. So follow the direction carefully. Use your reference photo and keep switching back and forth between the two, looking at them to make sure that you have your hairs in the right place and the right length. Adding hair under the eye using a short stroke. Coming out to the edge of the face. I've moved the Bobcat up in the camera frame so you can see it a little better. I'm using the 299 to start putting in the light strokes of fur underneath the eye. I'm very careful of the direction. The hair here is very short. It gets longer as it grows out towards the edges of the face, and it also is going to get longer as it grows down the face. So I'm just putting little strokes in between these black stripes and spots that are on his face. We're carefully placing the hair. I left this in real time so you can see how slowly I go when I'm putting the hair on an animal. I'm switching back to the 211 white. So I'm using the 211 white and the 299 light gray, going back and forth to add the fur on the cat's face. And the angle starts to change. It's kind of horizontal when we first started out, and now it's starting to angle downward as we go lower on the Bobcat's face. That's important to remember. For good painting, observation is key. So I'm just adding those little hairs and working down the face. I've speeded this up just a little bit. Now here I have my black charcoal pencil and I'm pulling little black hairs out. So what I'm doing is really kind of weaving together these areas. Pulling the black hairs out of the spot into the white hairs that we've already added, and it makes the fur become part of each other. Each of the colored sections become part of the other this way, which is the way hair is. So I'm just doing that with the black charcoal pencil to give a more subtle effect. Here I've gone back to my 211 white and I'm adding the hair on the side of the face, pulling it out into the background. Now if you look closely, you can see where I drew in the white charcoal pencil lines originally. They're showing through the background, so I know where the edge of the cat's face is. So now I can put in the final hairs with my white 211 New Pastel. Now I'm adding a few brown hairs here, as you can see. So I can go back and forth between the black, the brown, the white, just adjusting it as I see. I'm continuing to work down the face and changing the angle of the hair. So now we're turning it in a more downward motion. We're still using very short little strokes. Now, as I work down in this area of the cat's face, the hair gets a little bit longer. And so I'm careful to make my strokes longer. And they also turn very much downward, almost straight down. So I'm directing my strokes in that direction. He's really looking handsome, I think. I'm going to speed up my process now. Continue adding the hairs. So I am now working under the chin where the hairs are much longer. So I'm being very careful to draw out long, thin hairs. And I'm keeping my pastel very sharp. And I'm doing them very randomly. I've zoomed out so you can see me add the hairs a little better under the chin. So I'm pulling long hairs, and I'm being very random. We want them to not look so orderly. We don't want our cat to look like he's been to the groomer. He needs to be a little wild looking with his hair. I've switched from the white to the $2.99 new pastel. Please use your judgment of when to use what. Generally, the $2.99 is less brilliant than the white, so you might want to use it in more shaded areas, but it's your choice. I'm adding a little more blue down here in the background area to fill in underneath the fur before I stroke the fur on top of that area. Here I'm using my 259 dark gray new pastel to just lightly go over the tops of the white hairs to add some shadows in. It's really wonderful that you can do that. You can just pass the gray over top of it. The white will still show through, and you can create a shadow and increase the depth of a shadow that way. My very sharp white charcoal pencil to add some random hairs to the cat. You can pull them into the background, make them look rather wild. Just create such a beautiful look to your animals. Now we're going to add the hair to the chin of the bobcat because we do the behinder things first. So we did the hair underneath the chin. So now we'll go on top and add the chin hairs so that we can pull them down over the hairs that lie underneath. So I'm using a 211 white, very sharp, rotating it as I go to add the hair. These here are short and varying directions there, so they're not all one length coming out from underneath his mouth. So I have several layers of hair, so to speak. Some are shorter on the bottom of the chin and longer right around the mouth. Using my black new pastel to add a few black strokes into that, increasing the depth there in the mouth. And using the white charcoal pencil to pull out a few random hairs. When you're using your charcoal pencil, remember, less is more. So you don't want to overdo it with little hairs, just enough to make it look wild. Now you can see when I used my white charcoal stick to add a few more hairs, that made them a little brighter right in that one area of the mouth. And now I'm moving on to the top of the cat. And I'm using very short strokes. This would be a good time to put a piece of glassine underneath your hand. I don't have one. I'm not showing one here in the film, in the video, but I do have one and I must have forgotten it. So if you have some glassine, go and get it and put it underneath your hand to protect your artwork. I'm using my white new pastel. I added a few hairs over the bridge of the nose, and I'm adding a few vague little marks around the top of the nose. But now I'm using my Conte pencil number 47, and I'm doing very tiny little strokes to indicate the hair and the direction of the hair. Now I'm using the Conte pencil as opposed to a new pastel because it doesn't show up very well. It's not real bright, and we want a subtle effect. I like this pencil. I use it a lot in foxes and other warm colored animals, brown animals, because it works very nicely with their fur. You can add sharp little hair that are subtle. So I have nice short little hairs that I'm adding, but they're very subtle because the color is just perfect for this. It blends right in with the brown that we used before. I'm adding some 353 cordovan, pulling it up in between the lighter hairs that I put on the bridge of the nose. I like that better. Then we're going to use the Conte number 47 to continue to add hairs where we need them. I'm using the white charcoal pencil to just put in a few little hairs. Here I'm adding a few more brown hairs, weaving them into the white ones. You could also use your 223 burnt umber new pastel to do this. You can interchange it. Whatever works best for you. Here I'm using the 211 new pastel to add some brighter hairs, pushing just a little bit harder. Coming over to the edge of that muzzle area and adding short little hairs there. On this area, we have to be careful to work around the whisker holes because that's where the hairs come out. I mean, they come out around. There's a row of them under the first set of holes and the second and the third set. That's the way the fur grows. So we have to be sure that we do that we faithfully reproduce that with our pastel. So these are short little hairs. Take your time to put them in. So I'm going to continue to add those short little hairs. I'm going under the second row. Making sure they're all going in the same direction. They're very, very short. Now we're adding the hairs under the third row of the whisker holes. Using the edge of the stick, I can get very short, precise little hairs. This is well worth the practice, learning to use these sticks to make truly gorgeous animals. Now I'm using the white charcoal pencil to pull a couple of little hairs down from that upper lip area. Just helps to integrate everything in. And now I'm using my black 6B charcoal pencil to pull in some dark hairs down into the white area. I'm also darkening the holes just a little bit. My white new pastel very lightly on a dull edge, it's not sharp now, to make very light marks to put resemblance of fur, but I don't want really sharp fur here, just barely touching the paper. Using my 353 to add little brown accents. Zoomed my camera back out. I'm adding a few more light, very light pressure little hairs in the bridge of the nose. I hope you've enjoyed this. Join me for part 4 as we finish up our Bobcat.